welcome you all to the second panel of the first day. And this panel will aim to discuss the current status of natural language processing techniques. And here in the context of the web, we can think, or we know that they can be used to generate textual descriptions for images, but also for other visual media that's presented on web pages. And we'll focus today our discussion on, or we'll start to consider aspects such as text adaptation and how to provide understandable text to better meet web user needs and their different contexts of use, and also what are future perspectives for natural language processing on web accessibility, or to support web accessibility. So I'm glad to welcome back Michael, Shivam, and Amy. Okay, you are Amy. And also to welcome Shaomei Wu from AI Empower, who agreed to join us on the second panel of the day. Welcome you all back, and welcome Shaomei. For your first intervention, I ask you just to briefly introduce yourself. Your three other co-panelists have already done that in the previous panel, so no need to reintroduce yourselves.
Yeah.
But I will start by thinking about once again the quality. So we go back to the quality topic, but now the quality of machine-generated descriptions, now no longer from the perspective of image processing, but from the perspective of the natural language generation, right? So how can we improve the quality of these machine-generated descriptions, especially taking into account the personalized preferences from users? And I will start with you, Shaomei.
Hello all. So thank you all for having me here today. And my name is Shaomei Wu, and right now I'm the founder and CEO of Empower.org, tech non-profit that researchers and create in empowering technology for and ways marginalized users. And first of all, I want to also share that I do have a stutter, so that you may hear a little bit more pauses and filler words when I talk. And before Empower, I was a research scientist at Facebook, leading a lot of research and product work on accessibility, inclusion, and equity. So one of those products that I shipped is automatic art text. Feature that we will provide short and machine generated description of images on Facebook and Instagram to screen reader users in real time. So when it comes to quality of automatic art text or other similar systems, we saw two kind of biggest area of development that we wanted to do. And the first one is accuracy, which I think we talked a lot about in the last panel as well. But I want to kind of talk a little bit more about the second one, which is the richness of those descriptions. So to be honest, like the artifacts that we generated was quite limited. You know, a lot of users will say that it's more like a teaser kind of, you know, and telling you like, oh, there are 5 people smiling, pizza, indoor, but no more than that, you know, no more than what kind of pizza and what kind of like indoor environment. Is it at home? Is it like a restaurant? So I think our users really want to kind of get all the kind of richness of what someone who has eyesight can see, you know, can kind of access. So one particular kind of area that users really want to know more is it's about people, who they are, how do they look like, their race, gender, and even how attractive they are, because that is something really kind of socially salient. So that was a kind of big challenge for us when we were designing our system, because, you know, like how can we share those kind of attributes in a like in a both accurate and a kind of socially conscious way. So we actually opt to not kind of showing like the race and the gender of the people being photographed, but which we got actually a lot of complaint on. But how to kind of convey those in a kind of socially respectful way, I think it's something we should really work on. And now I can see kind of like a few ways that we can make that better. For example, like considering the like relationship between kind of people in the photo and the viewers. For example, like if they are friends, and then we can just tell them the name and other things about those people. And then another thing is to kind of give people progress details, so then like have some kind of option to kind of allow the consumer of those artifacts to kind of request more details that we just cannot provide by our systems. So I will be done here and let other panelists talk.
Thank you, Shaomei. Shivam, your thoughts on how can we improve the quality of machine-generated descriptions?
Okay, so this is a two-part thing. So when you come to technically implement your models, right? How you have designed your model, how you have trained them, and who were the stakeholders of designing a particular model is very much necessary in how you're going to get the quality machine-generated description. Now, when we take into account users' personalized preferences, right? This is two-part to it. So first, let's take an example. I am a person who knows Spanish, right? And my model, a very famous model, gives descriptions in English, right? Now, that model or whatever the consumption of that model is, let's say you're using an API to consume the model. So that should take into account the user's personalized preferences of his language and provide the output based on that as well. So this diversity of a model to prepare output in multiple formats, multiple languages, is something that can be looked into. This is how the quality of machine generated description increases. Now, you need not train the complete model separately. What you can do is just create a post-processing scripts for your models, and that can help the end user. It's not much of an effort when we say as a model training input, but it's very simple solution to what can be a best solution. The other thing is how you prepare your quality data. Now, you should carefully categorize it, structure the data if needed, and let's say you have input data that are blurred images and all sorts of things. So you need to carefully prepare your model training data, and based on that data, your description would be a bit more clearer, and the personalization would also be factored in when you look into how you can post process your data for a certain group of people. So that's how I see it.
Thank you. Amy, want to share your experiences?
Sure. So a couple ways that I've seen that I think are sort of promising maybe to use NLP to improve quality. One thing I've started seeing recently is people, starting to consider context around the image that's going to be described to maybe create a description that's more helpful. So imagine, someone writes a post on Twitter and they couple that post with an image. So considering the post and the image together maybe might inform models on how to create something that's more informative. So for instance, if I posted a picture of myself snowboarding and I said I learned a new trick, then it might be important to tell me what trick you learned. Whereas on the other hand, I said I just went on vacation, the exact trick might not matter as much. And so I think that the idea of like using language understanding to get more information about the context before making a prediction is promising. And another way I've sort of seen it used to maybe improve the quality kind of goes back to the other answers that were given. So maybe you can use question answering about the image to gain more information when you need it. One thing I've also thought about is seeing if maybe users could give examples or their preferences about descriptions in natural language. So this is an example of a description. Maybe we can copy the style of this description when we're applying it to other descriptions. So maybe I like to hear about the costumes someone wears in a video, and I wish that future descriptions might include more information about that rather than summarizing them. And then finally, one other way I've used NLP to improve quality is also based on summarization. So there can be times when there's more to describe than time you have to describe it. So especially in videos, there's often a really small amount of time to describe without overlapping the other audio. So one way you can use NLP to improve the quality is by trying to summarize those descriptions so they fit within the time you have, and they don't decrease the experience of people trying to watch the video and hear the audio at the same time. Yeah.
Yep, that's definitely a good use for NLP. Michael, still in this topic, I would like to have your perspective on initiatives from WAI that might assist users in providing their preferences so that eventually models can use those or anything that might be ongoing in that regard.
Okay, so First, I'll just repeat the disclaimer for anybody new to this session that I'm not a machine learning professional. I'm speaking from the perspective of my work in the Web Accessibility Initiative. I do want to talk briefly. I think the other panelists covered almost anything I would have said. One thing that, based on my knowledge of how machine learning works generally today, models tend to be focused on a particular ability, and that's not universal. In the future, models will have more abilities combined, but so there may be one model that can recognize this is a human and here are those attributes, another one that can say this is this human, and yet another one that can say this human plus that human equals this relationship. So all of that information, I believe, is separate right now. So the ability for models to share context, I think, is going to be a part of the solution that we need. So what I can speak of from the Web Accessibility Initiative, we are only beginning to explore what AI and accessibility means, and so this symposium is a part of that process. We have a practice of doing research papers, sort of literature reviews, and then proposing accessibility user requirements. So that would be something that we could be working on to start gathering this information, and from there we decide what to do, whether content goes into guidelines or into new technologies or whatever. But I think most of the resources around AI would fit into new resources for those categories.
Okay, great, thanks. And I would like now to move on to addressing something that was basically the core of Yuta's keynote. So it's discriminating bias or any other type of bias. And here, also looking at something that Antonio Gambabari has entered in the Q&A for the previous panel, but I think it's also very well fit. It fits very well into this topic, and he brought out the use of large language models, LLMs, and which are currently getting a lot of traction and a lot of spotlight. And do you think these LLMs can open up new avenues, as Antonio Gambabari was mentioning, for reducing the different type of bias that we see in as a result of the use of AI training models? And Shivam, you want to go first this time?
Yeah, sure. So this is quite a question which is has been close to my heart as well. How can we address social bias in largely ML models, right? As part of industry, I have seen a lot of ML models trainings, how the output comes. So social bias in ML model are results of data that they have been trained on and how the social attitude is represented within that model. Most of that available data is used to train models publicly sourced one, right? Which contains a certain degree of bias, as you can see, because most of the data that are generated on internet is basically those people who can consume it, right? It's not that everybody ones who doesn't even know what internet is, they cannot create a data over there. So most of the data that is available to train a model, it's based out of that scene. So that's how you see a bias in one way. The other instance I can give an example is you will see a lot of street violence, homelessness, drug overdose, and all those things overrepresented in the text that discuss mental illness. Although these both are not similar, but you will find these kind of representation in an ML outputs, right? How can we address this? Now, there is a novel way of human in the loop or human feedback loop on an existing models where you can provide some feedback to the already existing model that this sort of output is not correct, this can be a correct version, this can be a correct version, and some human interference is needed over there. Now the other aspect of it is representational training of ML models. Now the underlying data of models, right, it's the main source of the issue here. So you need to correctly source your data and correctly structure your data, that you're not over representing one section of data. For example, let's say you have a bigger society. The society can be underprivileged, overprivileged, and maybe some richer persons, right? That's a section of society. Now you cannot just take the data from one section of society and train a model and say that I can give you a complete picture of particular area, right? There must a separate section which are underrepresented. That's what is happening with all the models right from the start of ML. You can see. Now, what we can also do to mitigate is you can create an inclusive workflows. Whoever is a developer of ML model, who is a designer of the ML model, you can give the inclusive workflow training to them. You can get them aware that what is happening and how we can mitigate this. So all the person who are included in ML generation, or there are a lot of ETL going on, I mean, a lot of data extraction goes on. So all those people can be trained for inclusiveness. There are multiple tools that help us do that. Like if you are creating a model, you can test in Google helps us in uh, uh, analyzing your models. Like Google has what if tools, AI Fairness 360, how your models are performing when you talk about a lot of inclusive outputs of your data. Also, you need to do a thorough testing of your models whenever you go ahead, to include that all the outputs are properly aligned and properly represented. All the sections of your model it is intended to be used should be represented well. Your testing should be that thorough in case of any models you're creating, because now we are not at that stage that AI and ML is in very starting of state. It's quite mature right now. We are seeing a lot of breakthrough technologies, so we can do this going forward. I guess this can be a solution.
Okay, thank you, Shivam. Shaomei, can we have your input on how can we address social bias or other types of bias?
Yeah. So so then on this, I want to kind of go back to what I just kind of talked about before, in particular on kind of sensitive social identities, about people on the photos. I don't see a kind of good way for the current machine learning system to kind of accurately come out with those labels. I think the key kind of issue here is a lot of those systems will kind of really assume these like fixed and definitely kind of social categorizations, such as race and gender. So I think maybe we should think beyond kind of machine learning systems and kind of find a way to kind of attribute people respectfully through, by really kind of tapping into like agencies of those being kind of photographed and being described. For example, I think now a lot of people has been kind of specifying their pronouns, for example, in their in social media bios. And I think those kind of information should be made use of, or could be kind of made use of when we kind of assigning on, when we describing the gender of somebody in the photo. And also another kind of directions that we have been kind of exploring is to just kind of describing the appearances instead of identities. For example, kind of describe skin tones or hairstyle and outfit instead of assigning a kind of race or kind of gender label of somebody. But I don't think any of those solutions can really address the kind of the root cause of the problem. So I don't really have a very good answer on this. I think maybe we should, like maybe the alternative is to kind of think of the way to convey and kind of share who we are without so much relying on the kind of images like we are today. So, like how can we convey the kind of information that we want to share online in a not so visual centric way. I think that's a kind of bigger question for us all too. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaomei. Amy, next to you.
I think the prior the prior answers mostly covered the things I was going to mention. I loved Xiaomei's answer about describing ourselves in ways that, or like figuring out ways that don't rely on the visual information and giving agency to people to add their identities identities that they want to be shared. I will say that I think that depends. In different contexts, you might want to share different parts of your identity if it's important to you, and you might. And so I think that even things that give like end users agency might have a lot of subtlety in how they would be applied in different cases. And I like the idea, of describing, aspects of appearance. I think you're missing one challenge with that is you might be sort of trading off between these like aspects of appearance that you're describing and the efficiency with which someone can like maybe they're not going to get the information as quickly as a sighted person would perceiving that person, and just because audio occurs over time. So I think it's an extremely difficult challenge, and in some cases it can matter. Like I can imagine seeing a photograph of the leadership of a company. You might want to know some quick details about the demographics of who's leading it, for instance. One thing that I've noticed that is sort of related to this is that when I'm asking, so I sometimes have people describe videos, and there can be a lot of differences in which aspects, even if they're going to describe the aspects of someone's appearance, the way they describe those based on who is in front of them can also differ based on biases that people have. So if people see a woman, they might describe her differently than they would describe a man. They might focus on different aspects of appearance. And so I think even things that go towards describing aspects of appearance will have to be very carefully designed, and it really feels like a challenging problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amy. Michael, any thoughts on this? And I would add something here, especially for you. Do you see any future role in accessibility guidelines in contributing to preventing bias in machine learning generated descriptions or whatever that results from these models?
Okay, I have an answer for that question. It could be longer than my prepared answer, so let's see where we go. I just want to add a couple thoughts to what the others have been saying. I want to first categorize bias. We're talking so far mainly about bias and recognition. Are there biases in how machine learning recognizes objects, people, etc., contexts? In that, one thing that magnifies the challenge in accessibility context is that the sample size of people with disabilities can be smaller in various training sets. And so there's a risk, that images of people with disabilities in a training set, or contexts that are important for them, like wheelchair ramps or something, will be excluded as outliers, or will be less well recognizable by the AI than images of other people are. That's just another dimension to the aspects of bias that we need to look at. But then we also need to look at bias in the application of this. We've talked a few times during the session about the risk of relying on machine-generated descriptions and captions as being good enough. Whereas content that has more of a mainstream audience might also have captions and descriptions that get more curated quality assurance. That kind of bias could creep in, and that can magnify the impact on disability bias, because it can cause people to be excluded from the fora that from which people are recruited to be part of training sets, et cetera. So, again, the ethical principles from web machine learning speaks to that, and I think that we may be identifying some content that we need to add to that. Moving on to what WAI can do about that, I do believe that it's within the scope of the Web Accessibility Initiative or the W3C to provide guidance in some form about how AI and accessibility should work together, addressing many of these things. Typically this sort of thing would be a working group note, which means that it's a formal document published by the W3C that's had a certain level of review. There's even opportunities for versions that have had more review and sign off. So I think that's one thing we might want to do. I'll also talk briefly about the work that we're doing on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 3.0. The W3C Accessibility Guidelines 3 or WCAG 3. It's a substantial re-envisioning, and it's been a core requirement from the beginning that we wanted to address address equity in the approach in the guidelines. How are we going to make sure that they're equitable to people with disabilities? We've been exploring that in specific ways within the working group, really unpacking that to understand the relationship of equity and accessibility and bias and any other dimensions. So that's turning, we're connecting that with other work W3C has been doing to make itself a more equitable organization. This is to say that I believe WCAG 3 will also have some structure built in and support resources addressing the issues of bias specifically. Now, these are hopes, not promises, but that's the direction from activities like this.
Thank you so much. And yes, those are really some exciting avenues that we hope that can come to fruition in the near future. So I guess final question for everyone, and it is, I would like to know a bit about your future perspectives on the use of natural language processing for the field or in the field of PD accessibility. And I'll start with you this time, Amy.
Yeah, so I think this is a really exciting area. And one shift I've found recently among people in NLP who I talk to is that, as the models are getting better at just creating like fluent text that looks reasonable, that a lot of people are becoming more interested in what are the actual applications of this and how can we build tools that actually support those applications rather than relying on, automated metrics but that might not, capture people's experiences. So I wanted to note that that's a direction I've found exciting. So I guess a couple things I think could be promising are, and I've kind of mentioned them before in my other in my other responses, but as we gain the ability to describe more and more about the image, I think that NLP can provide a really good opportunity to personalize those descriptions based on the person and what they want, as well as the context. There's, if you think about walking in a room, there's like so much you could possibly describe. If we could make it easier for people to get the information that they're looking for quickly from their media, that would be a great improvement. And, combining computer vision to recognize things in the underlying image and using something like NLP to summarize that description, I think is promising and exciting. And one other way I think I'm excited about it is in its opportunities to maybe help people with their own description tasks. So when we have humans working on descriptions, it's really hard. So, novices sometimes have a hard time remembering and applying the guidelines that exist. Maybe we could rewrite people's descriptions of videos to be more in line with how an expert would write them by making them more concise or changing the grammar a bit so that it fits what people are expecting from their guidelines. Or we might alert people to aspects of their own descriptions that that could be changed a little bit to perhaps reduce something like bias that they have in their descriptions. So I think there's really lots of exciting opportunities in terms of authoring descriptions as well as making those end descriptions a little bit better. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot. Shivam.
Yeah, so I see it a bit of more opportunity now rather than earlier, because now the models, the engines are quite advanced. So I see a good context-aware solution that gives you faster processing, some efficient data, right? And that works on text, video, and as well as audio. So I see this happening to be a reality. A good use case I would have been following up also is how we can make the academic textbooks. We have academic assignments, right? There are multiple charts, bar charts, graphs, all associate data. If these models or technologies can create a better understanding of those things, it would help a lot of people in understanding that, who have difficulty just by reading it, or maybe in absence of good quality descriptions of these charts, bars, and all those things. I see this happening in next few years, a better description, generation. And as a closing comment, I would say there are different sets of consumers of media, right? Some can easily read but not comprehend. Some can comprehend easily but have difficulty consuming it visually. Now, in that sense, the coming NLP technologies would help design as a contextual description of outputs, and that I would see in simple terms. If you give me a simple, efficient, faster output of a media and it's correct, then it would be the pinnacle of what I see as a NLP. And these are for natural language processing, understanding, as well as generation, for all three technologies.
Thank you so much. Yes, exciting times ahead, definitely. Michael, you want to share your vision?
So based on my knowledge of how machine learning in the present day works, the tools tend to be more focused on specific abilities, which means that the context is a bit isolated. So I think I'm speaking more as a person working in the field, identifying a need rather than something that may necessarily be a technological potential, but the Internet of Things uses APIs to exchange data between different types of devices, and if we could model some structure like that so that these tools could share context with each other and negotiate a better group description, I think that might be an opportunity for early evolution of this field. Long term, of course, think tools will emerge with greater sets of context built in, but that'll probably be another tier / singularity / whatever. So that's my view on the near-term future based on my knowledge.
Yeah, good suggestions to look at also. And Shaomei.
Yeah. So looking into the future, I can see kind of two air areas that I think will have a lot of potentials. And first one is from the technology perspectives, which I agree with Michael that I can see a lot of gain in kind of incorporating the context surrounding photos, and by really, like taking advantage of the recent progress in deep learning models that kind of have a kind of multi-model representation space. So, like we can embed both the kind of image as well as the kind of text surrounding it, and then other kind of meta data such as author or the kind of the time when the photo was taken or kind of posted. So, a lot of those can be kind of joined in a kind of big representation space that kind of provide us a lot more than just kind of visual information alone. So I think that's a kind of big technology breakthrough that we can see in the kind of near-term future. But the kind of second thing I think is more important to me is the kind of use case perspectives. I think right now when we think about or kind of talk about the media accessibility, we are mostly kind of think about the consumption case, right? Like how do we help somebody who cannot see to kind of consume photos that are posted by others, and mostly by kind of sighted folks. But I think it's equally important, but largely kind of overlooked is this kind of media creation use cases. Like how can we support people with visual impairment to kind of create and kind of share photos and videos. In my own work into these use cases, we just find there's like such a gap in what the kind of current technology can do. For example, one, like all the kind of modern AI models really failed when it comes to processing photos taken by people with visual impairments, because they are just not the same kind of photo that are used to train those models. So there's a huge gap in what kind of current, like the kind of fundamentals of those models, and then what they can do. And then second is there's a lot of need for kind of more personalized and aesthetic needs, right? It's like after I take 10 selfies, I wanna find out the one that I wanna post that kind of share who I am. And that is what it's like we cannot do at all. We can, we can kind of tell you like, okay, you have 10 photos and all kind of containing your face inside. But but then how can we train kind of the models that kind of really kind of represent somebody's taste and then somebody's kind of aesthetics? And I think that's another interesting future development that I want to see. So that's all.
Thank you so much, Shaomei. And think we only have 4 minutes more, so I won't risk another question because we need to end at the top of the hour. So I will take the opportunity to once again thank our panelists, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. It was really interesting, very optimistic perspectives, so that we can see that it's not just the more risky or risk enabling outputs that AI can have. So it's nice to have these perspectives. So thank you once again, Shaomei, Shivam, Amy, and Michael. It was brilliant to have you here. And thanks everyone who attended.